The night visitor. When I was 21, I often found myself alone in my parents' sprawling house. The property backed onto a small, dark pond that separated us from the town park beyond. Our neighbors were few and far between, an affluent neighborhood where privacy came with the price tag. During college breaks, I had the entire house to myself, as my family was frequently away at one of our other homes. That particular summer night, I can't recall if it was a weekend or not, I was curled up in the sunroom, my favorite space in the house. The windows were open, inviting the night breeze to dance with the curtains, creating shifting shadows across the walls. The television's glow cast an eerie blue light throughout the room as I nestled into the corner of the couch. That's when I heard it, a rhythmic disturbance in the water outside. Initially I dismissed it as waterfowl, but something about the persistence of the sound gnawed at my subconscious. I lowered the volume, the sudden silence hanging heavy in the air. Pressing my ear against the cool glass of the window, I listened intently. The splashing continued, too deliberate, too heavy to be any kind of wildlife. It was unmistakably human. My pulse quickened as I carefully opened the door to the deck, stepping out into the suffocating darkness. The night air seemed to press against my skin as I strained to see through the impenetrable black void that was our backyard. And then, cutting through the darkness like a blade, a man's voice, humming a tuneless melody that synchronized with each splash. Someone was in our pond. Trespassing. Fighting the tremor in my hand, I flicked on the outdoor lights. The splashing and humming ceased immediately. Whoever was out there had seen me. I retreated inside, securing the lock with trembling fingers, and texted my brother about the intruder. No immediate response. The television continued playing, but it had become white noise drowned out by my thundering heartbeat and the blood rushing in my ears. That's when the revelation hit me. The light from the TV was making me visible to whoever lurked outside. As I fumbled for the remote, a sound froze me in place, the unmistakable creak of weight shifting on our wooden deck. The screen went black, plunging the room into darkness. As my eyes adjusted, another sound materialized, heavy, ragged breathing just outside one of the many windows surrounding me. Each exhale fogged the glass, inches from where I sat. I flattened myself against the couch cushions, willing my body to disappear into the fabric. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable, until it was shattered by a deep voice that seemed to seep through the glass. "I see you." My heart plummeted. Fight or flight instinct kicked in, and I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Paul, is that you?" Naming our neighbor in desperate hope. No response, just the soft padding of bare feet retreating across the deck. I remained paralyzed on the couch, seconds stretching into minutes before the survival instinct to secure the house overtook my fear. I bolted to check each entry point, confirming they were locked. After updating my family, my father instructed me to investigate, to be the man of the house. Clutching a kitchen knife so tightly my knuckles turned white, I cautiously stepped onto the deck. The evidence was there, half-dried footprints, bare and wet, tracing a path around the side of the deck. I followed them, the wooden boards seeming to groan warnings with each step. What awaited me will forever be seared into my memory. Just above the deck's edge, a pair of eyes and a forehead, peering up at me from the darkness below. Our gazes locked for one heart-stopping moment before the figure vanished. The police came, asked their questions, searched the property, and ultimately left. That night, I sealed every window, despite the summer heat, running the air conditioning as a small comfort as I waited for dawn. The morning sunlight was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. To this day, we never discovered who the nighttime visitor was, or what they wanted. The voice in the parking lot. I have a routine with my dog. 3 daily walks, with the last one always taking place after nightfall. Our path never varies through our driveway and into the cul-de-sac parking lot of our condominium complex. During these night excursions, I always bring a flashlight since the parking lot lacks proper lighting. I also wear just one earbud, leaving the other ear free to remain alert to my surroundings. This precaution saved me one night from something I still can't explain. As we approached the parking lot during our final walk, the music playing in my ear almost masked a sound coming from ahead of us. Almost. Something about it pulled me from my thoughts, forcing me to stop in my tracks. I removed my earbud and stood perfectly still, listening intently to the darkness. And then it came again. A voice, somewhere in the blackness before me. I couldn't pinpoint its source or see anyone nearby. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I cautiously continued forward, convincing myself I was hearing things. After a few more steps, I stopped beside the row of parked cars, sweeping my flashlight in wide arcs around me. The beam cut through the darkness, but revealed nothing unusual. Then I heard it, a muffled voice, childlike, but somehow wrong, uttered a single word. Asterisk. Help. Asterisk. My entire body went cold. I frantically directed my light in every possible direction, certain the sound came from between the parked vehicles, yet finding nothing but empty spaces and shadows. The voice spoke again, repeating that same word 3 more times. Asterisk. Help. 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 Asterisk. It emanated from my left, where the cars were parked. My dog's ears perked up, his head turning in the same direction, confirming I wasn't imagining this nightmare. That's when I realized what was so deeply unsettling about the voice. It didn't sound entirely like a child. I can't properly explain it, but it was as if an adult was attempting to mimic a child's voice, and failing in subtle, skin-crawling ways. Each time the word was repeated, it was identical to the last, same inflection, same tone, same cadence. No desperation, no change in volume or urgency. Just that same mechanical plea. Asterisk. Help. Asterisk. My dog and I fled home, where I tried explaining the encounter to my bewildered mother. She didn't think it warranted calling the authorities, but questions haunted me through the night. Why was the voice muffled? Was someone truly trapped in one of the vehicles? Or was something more sinister trying to lure me closer? The parking lot where this occurred offers no explanations. There's nothing there that could account for what my dog and I both heard. The cars parked that night were primarily large trucks and SUVs, creating a maze of metal and shadows where anything or anyone could hide. I never learned what spoke to us that night, and I've never felt safe during our night walks since. The hole in the wall. What I'm about to share is the reason my parents abandoned a house that had been in our family for 3 generations. I've battled depression for most of my life, and it was particularly severe during my childhood. Consequently, I spent considerable time isolated in my bedroom, which was situated in the back corner of our house. The room was unusually large, with windows on 2 walls that faced the dense woods surrounding our property on 3 sides. Our closest neighbors were separated from us by a thick forest, a situation that already made me uneasy as a child who feared the dark. The incidents began when I was around 10 years old. I had reached that awkward age where seeking comfort in my parents' bed after nightmares was no longer acceptable, yet adults still dismissed my fears as overactive imagination. The first irregularity I noticed involved my nightlight. It had adjustable color settings, and I consistently set it to emit a comforting red glow before falling asleep. One night I unexpectedly woke in the middle of the darkness, something unusual for me, as I typically slept soundly through the night. In my groggy state, I observed that my nightlight had somehow changed color from the red I always selected. Too exhausted to investigate, I drifted back to sleep within moments. Approximately a week later, I awoke to find my nightlight once again displaying a different color. Concerned, I questioned my parents, who appeared genuinely confused by my accusation. They dismissed it as a technical malfunction, assuring me the device had always been glitchy. Being young and trusting, I accepted their explanation. Then came the morning I discovered my nightlight completely unplugged and lying on the floor. Again, my parents minimized my concerns, suggesting I should focus on schoolwork instead. My father even added that I was getting too old for a nightlight anyway. Days later, the nightlight vanished entirely. This sparked a significant argument between my parents and me. I accused them of secretly removing it, while they adamantly denied any involvement. The conflict reached an impasse with neither side conceding. After about a week of relative normalcy, a new disturbance emerged. For 3 consecutive nights, I inexplicably woke in the middle of the night without any obvious cause. When it happened a 4th time, I consulted my parents. They attributed it to puberty and bodily changes, offering what seemed like a reasonable explanation. The 5th time it happened, instead of immediately falling back asleep, I remained awake. That's when I heard it, faint rustling noises emanating from my closet. My parents refused to believe me when I reported this. My father even conducted a cursory inspection of my closet, finding nothing but old toys and posters. The next 4 nights became the most psychologically traumatic of my life. Each night I would wake to those same rustling sounds coming from within my closet walls. The torment became unbearable. Desperate for validation, I pleaded with my parents until my father's patience snapped. In a fit of frustration, he dragged me to my closet, determined to prove nothing was there. He began aggressively tossing toys and items around, dismantling the closet piece by piece while berating me. Then he removed one of the posters from the wall. What it revealed transformed my father's anger into horror. Behind the poster was a substantial hole in the wall. My mother began screaming while my father retrieved a flashlight. The hole was too deep to illuminate its terminus, compelling my father to investigate from outside. What he discovered chilled our family to the core. A narrow tunnel had been excavated from the woods directly into my bedroom wall, hidden behind the closet poster. Someone had created a passage into my personal space, and had been using it regularly. That night, my mother and I sought refuge at my aunt's house. We never returned to live in that home, selling it shortly thereafter. For years, my parents refused to discuss the incident, perhaps out of guilt for dismissing my fears for so long. I'm still haunted by the knowledge that an unknown individual was entering my bedroom night after night for over a month. Their motives remain a mystery that perhaps is better left unsolved. If your child ever reports something unusual or frightening, please believe them. The abandoned road. I've always been fascinated by abandoned places. There's something eerily captivating about locations where human presence has faded, leaving only whispers of what once was. This attraction to forgotten spaces is what led me down that isolated country road last autumn, a decision I've regretted every day since. My photography hobby had me constantly seeking new subjects, particularly deserted buildings and overgrown paths. When a local forum mentioned an old access road leading to a decommissioned communications facility, my curiosity was immediately piqued. According to the Post, the facility had been shut down in the late 1980s, leaving behind a crumbling structure overtaken by nature. The directions were simple enough. Follow County Road 27 until the pavement ends, then continue onto the gravel extension for about 3 miles until spotting a weathered gate on the left. The facility would supposedly be visible from there, nestled among the trees about half a mile up a dirt road. I set out on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when the dying light of autumn created the perfect atmosphere for the photographs I envisioned. The main road gradually narrowed as I drove, the surrounding trees growing denser until they formed a natural tunnel of amber and crimson leaves. Eventually, the pavement surrendered to gravel, small stones pinging against the undercarriage of my car. The isolation became increasingly apparent. No passing vehicles, no roadside homes, not even power lines disrupted the untamed landscape. Just as I began questioning whether I'd missed my turn, a rusted gate materialized on my left, hanging precariously from a single hinge, as if beckoning me forward. I parked alongside the road and gathered my camera equipment. The temperature had dropped noticeably, my breath forming delicate clouds as I approached the gate. A weathered sign dangled from the metal frame, its text largely faded, except for fragments warning about trespassing and federal property. Given the apparent abandonment, I stepped past the gate without much concern. The dirt road beyond was barely distinguishable from the surrounding forest floor, clearly unused for decades. Fallen branches and persistent undergrowth reclaimed most of the path, forcing me to navigate carefully. About 20 minutes into my hike, I began questioning the information from the forum. There was no structure visible through the trees, no clearing indicative of a facility. Just as doubt settled in, the trees thinned slightly, revealing not the communications building I expected, but something else entirely, a house. Not an institutional structure, but a residential home, nestled incongruously in this isolated forest. Its weathered clapboard exterior had faded to a silvery gray, blending with the surrounding birch trees. Most windows remained intact, though several were obscured by dirt and decades of grime. This discovery was both confusing and thrilling. Why wasn't this residence mentioned in the forum post? How had a home existed out here, miles from any utilities or services? The photographer in me immediately began framing shots, capturing the haunting beauty of this forgotten dwelling. As I approached the front porch, the wooden steps groaned under my weight, despite my cautious ascent. The front door hung partially open, swaying gently in the autumn breeze. I called out, a habit from exploring abandoned places, but expected only silence in return. "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the surrounding stillness. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant calls of birds preparing for their evening routines. I stepped inside, the floorboards protesting beneath my feet. The interior was surprisingly intact. Furniture remained positioned as if the occupants had simply stepped out momentarily. A dining table with 4 chairs, a sitting area with a sofa and reading lamp, even curtains still hanging in the windows, though now tattered and faded. A fine layer of dust covered everything, undisturbed except for small animal tracks visible in some areas. I moved carefully through the home, photographing the remarkably preserved scenes of domestic life. In the kitchen, dishes remained stacked in a drying rack. A calendar on the wall displayed October 1976. Its pages never turned beyond that month. The refrigerator stood open, long emptied of contents. As I framed a shot of the kitchen, something in my viewfinder caught my attention, a splash of color inconsistent with the muted tones dominating the space. Lowering my camera, I approached the far wall where a child's crayon drawing was affixed with a magnet. The artwork depicted a simple house with 4 stick figures standing outside, presumably a family. But behind the figures loomed a 5th form, unnaturally tall and thin, its arms elongated well beyond human proportions. An uneasy feeling crept along my spine as I continued to the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The master bedroom appeared largely untouched, the bed neatly made, reading glasses placed on the nightstand alongside a book open to its middle pages. The second bedroom contained a child's belongings, toys arranged on shelves, a small desk with coloring books, walls decorated with more drawings similar to the one in the kitchen. Each artwork featured the same elongated figure lurking in the background. The bathroom door was closed, When I turned the handle, it resisted slightly before yielding. Inside, the medicine cabinet hung open, its contents scattered across the sink and floor, as if someone had frantically searched for something. The shower curtain was torn down, the rod bent at an unnatural angle. As I raised my camera to document this disruption, so at odds with the rest of the house, I noticed something in the mirror, a shadow moving in the hallway behind me. I spun around, but the hallway remained empty. Returning my gaze to the mirror, I saw nothing unusual reflected back. Just nerves, I muttered to myself, though the reassurance sounded hollow even to my own ears. The basement door was at the end of the hallway. Unlike the bathroom, this door was secured with a padlock, the only locked entrance in the entire house. The incongruity was striking enough that I photographed the door before moving on. As I returned to the living room, the quality of light had changed dramatically. Evening was approaching faster than anticipated, casting long shadows through the windows. I decided to take a few final photographs before heading back to my car. That's when I noticed the photographs on the mantelpiece, family portraits in simple frames. A mother, father, and young girl smiled from behind dusty glass. They appeared perfectly ordinary, except for one detail that froze the blood in my veins. In each photograph, barely visible in the background, was a blurred figure, tall, thin, and unnaturally proportioned. My hands trembling, I picked up one frame for closer inspection. As I tilted it toward the fading light, I noticed writing on the back of the photograph. In a child's uneven script were the words, "He's always watching us." A floorboard creaked somewhere in the house. I replaced the frame and quickly gathered my equipment. The sunset had progressed further than I'd realized, bathing the forest in deep crimson that would soon give way to darkness. I hurried down the porch steps and began retracing my path through the increasingly shadowy woods. About halfway back to the gate, I heard a distinct snapping of branches somewhere behind me. I increased my pace, my camera bag bouncing awkwardly against my hip. Another crack, closer this time. I abandoned all pretense of calm and broke into a run, branches whipping against my face as I tore down the overgrown path. The gate came into view just as twilight surrendered to dusk. I squeezed through the opening and sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys before finally collapsing into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and I accelerated down the gravel road, watching the rusted gate recede in my rearview mirror. No figure emerged from the woods, no tangible threat materialized. Yet the sense of being pursued, of narrowly escaping something unnatural, clung to me like the autumn chill. When I arrived home, I immediately connected my camera to my computer, eager to examine the photographs in detail. My fingers trembled as I clicked through the images, the exterior shots, the living room, kitchen, bedrooms, the padlocked basement door, and finally the family portraits. What I saw drained the warmth from my body. In every interior photograph, barely perceptible in the shadowed corners, or reflected in windows and mirrors, was a tall, thin figure, exactly like the one in the child's drawings. Most disturbingly, its position changed between sequential shots of the same room, as if it had moved while remaining just out of my direct sight. I've never returned to that abandoned road, or spoken publicly about what I found there. The forums where I first learned about the location no longer contain any mention of the access road or communications facility. County maps show nothing but uninterrupted forest in that area. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm home alone, I hear the distinctive creak of floorboards from unoccupied rooms, and occasionally, in my peripheral vision, I glimpse something tall and unnaturally thin, watching from just beyond the threshold of my awareness. The midnight train. The 11:58 p.m. train from Hartsdale to Grand Central wasn't my usual commute. I typically avoided late-night travel, but a colleague's farewell gathering had run longer than expected, leaving me with little choice but to catch the last train home. The station platform stood nearly deserted as I arrived, inhabited only by a handful of other late-night travelers scattered at respectful distances from one another. No one made eye contact, an unspoken rule of late-night public transit. The autumn air carried a biting chill that penetrated my light jacket, sending involuntary shivers across my shoulders as I checked the time. 11:53 p.m. 5 minutes later, the distant rumble announced the train's approach. The headlight appeared around the bend, illuminating swirling mist that had begun to settle across the tracks. As the train slowed to a stop, I noticed something peculiar. The cars appeared older than the usual modern commuter trains servicing this route. The exterior wore a faded maroon color rather than the silver I was accustomed to seeing. Equipment change, I reasoned to myself. They must be using an older train for the late-night service. The doors slid open with a distinctive hiss, and I boarded along with the other waiting passengers. The interior confirmed my suspicion about the train's age. The seats were arranged in pairs facing each other, rather than the usual forward-facing configuration, and the upholstery featured a vintage pattern I hadn't seen since childhood trips with my grandparents. Most curious was the lighting, rather than the harsh fluorescence of modern trains. This car was illuminated by warm amber wall sconces that cast gentle pools of light, leaving the spaces between in comfortable shadow. The effect was almost elegant, reminiscent of luxury rail travel from decades past. I selected an empty four-seat arrangement and settled by the window, placing my bag on the adjacent seat to discourage company. Not that it seemed necessary. Despite boarding with several other passengers, my car appeared nearly empty. Only one other person had entered, an elderly gentleman in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, who sat several rows ahead, his silver hair glinting in the amber light. The doors closed, and the train pulled away from the station with that familiar lurch and acceleration. I leaned back, prepared for the 43-minute journey to Grand Central. Outside, the suburban landscape of Hartsdale gave way to darkness as we entered a wooded stretch between stations. I checked my phone to find no signal, another common occurrence on this route, with its numerous tunnels and remote stretches. Resigning myself to a disconnected journey, I tucked the device away and gazed out the window at my own reflection superimposed over the passing darkness. The rhythmic clacking of wheels against tracks created a hypnotic cadence that nearly lulled me to sleep. I fought against heavy eyelids, knowing I'd likely miss my stop if I surrendered to exhaustion. As a distraction, I observed the elderly gentleman ahead of me. He sat perfectly still, gazing out his own window, his posture impossibly straight. As if sensing my attention, he turned and met my gaze. His face, weathered by decades, nevertheless possessed a timeless quality. His eyes, however, reflected the amber lighting with an unusual intensity. He nodded politely before returning his attention to the window. The train entered a tunnel, the sudden darkness broken only by the intermittent amber lighting within the car. When we emerged, I expected to see the familiar approach to the next station, Scarsdale, but instead the view revealed only continuous forest, darker and denser than any stretch I recognized from my usual commutes. Checking my watch, I noted we had been traveling for nearly 15 minutes. We should have reached Scarsdale already. Perhaps this late-night service operated as an express, skipping the usual stops. Yet that wouldn't explain the unfamiliar landscape outside. The gentleman rose from his seat with deliberate movements, and made his way down the aisle. As he passed my row, he paused, regarding me with those strangely luminous eyes. "First time on the midnight train?" he inquired, his voice carrying a refined quality that matched his appearance. "I usually take an earlier service," I replied, uncertain why I felt compelled to explain myself. He nodded knowingly. "The midnight train takes a different route, more scenic." Before I could inquire further, he continued down the aisle and disappeared through the door connecting to the next car. I remained puzzled by his statement and increasingly concerned about the unfamiliar surroundings outside. Gathering my belongings, I decided to locate the conductor for clarification. Moving toward the rear of the car, I noticed something I had overlooked during boarding. There were no emergency maps or route information posted on the walls, no modern safety placards or advertisements, just smooth, polished wood paneling interrupted occasionally by those amber sconces. I passed through the door into the next car, expecting to find other passengers, or perhaps the conductor. Instead, I encountered a scene that stopped me in my tracks. Unlike the car I had just left, this one was fully occupied. Men in suits and fedoras, women in dresses and hats styled in fashions decades out of date. They conversed quietly amongst themselves, some reading newspapers with headlines I couldn't quite make out in the dim lighting. Not one of them acknowledged my presence, as I stood frozen in the doorway. Their conversations continued in hushed tones, creating a background murmur that somehow failed to form distinct words despite my proximity. "Excuse me," I finally managed, addressing the nearest passenger, a woman whose elegant appearance suggested fashion from the 1940s. "Could you tell me where this train is headed?" She turned slowly, revealing a face that seemed simultaneously youthful and ancient. Her eyes, like those of the elderly gentleman, reflected the amber light with unnatural intensity. "Why, to the last station, of course," she replied, her voice distant yet perfectly audible above the mechanical rhythm of the train. "We're all bound for the last station." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. I retreated back through the door to my original car, nearly colliding with the elderly gentleman, who now stood just on the other side. "You shouldn't wander between cars," he admonished gently. "It's best to remain in your assigned section until we reach your destination." "This isn't the normal train to Grand Central, is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He smiled, revealing teeth too perfect for his apparent age. "The 1158 hasn't stopped at Grand Central in a very long time. Not since they changed the schedules in 53. Holis, 1953. My voice emerged as barely a whisper. "Indeed, a shame they don't properly announce these things." His eyes crinkled with what might have been sympathy. "Don't worry though, everyone reaches their proper destination eventually." The train began to slow, though no station was visible through the windows, only that same impenetrable darkness punctuated by the occasional spectral tree. "Ah, your stop approaches," he said, gesturing toward the door. "You'll want to disembark here. This train continues much further than you're prepared to travel tonight." The brakes engaged with a screech that seemed to penetrate my very bones. Outside, a platform materialized, not a proper station, but a simple wooden structure illuminated by a single lamp post. Beyond it, a path wound into the forest, marked by widely spaced lights that diminished into the distance. "But where are we?" I asked, clutching my bag tightly. "This isn't anywhere near my home." "Perhaps not," the gentleman conceded. "But it's where you need to be tonight. The path will take you where you need to go, if you follow it precisely." The doors slid open with that same hydraulic hiss. Cool mist rolled into the car, carrying the scent of damp earth and something older, more primal. "You must decide quickly," the gentleman urged. "This train only stops momentarily for each passenger." Heart pounding, I stepped onto the platform. The wooden boards creaked beneath my weight as I turned to watch the doors close. Through the window, the elderly gentleman raised his hand in farewell, his amber-lit silhouette growing indistinct as the train pulled away. Within moments, the train vanished into the darkness, the sound of its passage fading, until I stood in complete silence, broken only by the distant calls of night birds and the rustling of leaves. The path before me offered the only visible route away from the platform. Each step along it felt like a decision I couldn't reverse, yet staying behind seemed unthinkable. I walked for what seemed like hours, following those intermittent lights, until finally emerging at a familiar street corner, just 2 blocks from my apartment building. The digital clock in my living room read 3:17 a.m. when I finally collapsed into my armchair, still wearing my jacket. Sleep evaded me for the remainder of the night, as I replayed the journey in my mind, questioning my perception and memory. The following evening, I left work early to ensure I would catch a rush-hour train, rather than risk another late-night commute. As I passed the station schedules posted near the entrance, a detail caught my eye that I had overlooked for years. A small asterisk beside the 11:58 p.m. departure time, with a footnote in minute text below. Asterisk service runs on original heritage equipment. Route varies from daytime service. Not all passengers will reach conventional destinations. I've taken a different job since then, one that doesn't require commuting through Hartsdale. On the rare occasions when I must travel by train, I make absolutely certain to conclude my business well before sunset. Some routes, I've learned, are best left untraveled, particularly those that depart at 11:58 p.m. The Whispers in Room 207. During my second year of college, I found affordable housing in a historic Victorian boarding house, just blocks from campus. The landlady, Mrs. Whitaker, a remarkably spry elderly woman, showed me around the well-maintained building with its high ceilings and creaking hardwood floors. "We have a particular way of doing things here," she explained. "Quiet hours begin at 9, no overnight guests without approval, and absolutely no disturbances after 11. Room 207 was surprisingly spacious with a bay window overlooking an oak-lined street. When I inquired about the previous tenant, Mrs. Whitaker's expression tightened before she responded with practiced neutrality. "A graduate student who received an unexpected research opportunity abroad. The house has certain peculiarities," she continued. "Old pipes make noises. Wood expands and contracts. Some tenants require an adjustment period. Not everyone is suited to historic accommodations." The rent was remarkably reasonable. I signed immediately and moved in that weekend. My first few nights passed uneventfully. The other tenants were quiet. I rarely encountered them beyond brief nods in hallways. Most appeared to be graduate students or young professionals. On my fourth night, I first noticed the whispers. I had been drifting towards sleep when I became aware of what sounded like distant conversation coming from the wall behind my headboard. The whispers were too faint to discern words, but had an urgency to their cadence, as if the unseen speakers were engaged in heated debate. I pressed my ear against the wall. The whispers immediately ceased. I waited, but the room remained silent, save for occasional creaking. "Just the pipes," I assured myself, recalling Mrs. Whitaker's mention of the building's quirks. The following evening, I met Diane, a doctoral candidate in history, in the kitchen. When I casually mentioned the whispering, her spoon paused mid-stir. "Which room are you in?" 207. Something flickered across her expression before she composed herself. Mrs. Whitaker mentioned the pipes. "These old heating systems produce all manner of sounds. You'll grow accustomed to them." That night, I stayed up reading. Around midnight, the whispers returned, faint at first, then increasing in urgency. One voice spoke rapidly, another responded in shorter bursts, occasionally joined by a third, higher-pitched voice. The emotional tenor was unmistakable, desperation mixed with persuasion. I recorded the sounds with my phone, but playback revealed only static and ambient house noises, nothing resembling what I heard from the wall. Over the following weeks, the whispers became a nightly occurrence, always beginning around midnight, and continuing for about 20 minutes before abruptly ceasing. Sleep became increasingly elusive. Dark circles formed beneath my eyes, and my academic performance suffered. I examined the wall behind my bed, finding only solid plaster and lath beneath Victorian wallpaper. No hollow spaces or unusual resonance. According to the house's layout, I shared this wall with room 209, occupied by a long-term resident who worked nights. I approached Mrs. Whitaker about the issue. "Whispers from the wall you share with Mr. Carver," she repeated after I explained. "Yes, consistently around midnight. I understand old houses make noises, but these sound distinctly like voices in conversation." Her fingers tapped rhythmically on her desk. "Mr. Carver is a particularly private individual, with specific sensitivities. I assure you he would not deliberately disturb your rest." Her tone cooled when I suggested potential causes. "This house has stood for over a century. It has been continuously maintained, and is free of such infestations. Perhaps you would be more comfortable in a modern apartment complex. The previous occupant of your room also required an adjustment period. Unfortunately, he lacked the temperament for historical accommodations," she added ominously. That night, the whispers began earlier, and seemed louder, more insistent. I slipped into the hallway, hoping to better hear from between the rooms. As I approached room 209, fragments became clearer. "Can't hold much longer. Need to cross over. Trapped here since." A floorboard creaked beneath my foot, and the whispers ceased immediately. They don't like to be overheard. I turned to find an elderly man, in old-fashioned formal attire, standing behind me. Tall, gaunt, with deep-set eyes that reflected no light.
Oh.
"Mr. Carver," I guessed. He nodded slightly. "You've been inquiring about me, about the noises. I apologize if I've disturbed you. I've been hearing voices through our shared wall." "Not through the wall," he corrected. "From within it. Room 207 has always been permeable. The previous occupant discovered this. He became rather obsessed with the voices, attempting to transcribe their conversations. Eventually, he found a way to respond to them. What happened to him? Mrs. Whitaker will tell you he received a research opportunity abroad." A convenient explanation. Mr. Carver took a step toward me. "The truth is more complicated. He found what he was looking for, a way through. The wall between listener and speaker is thinner in that room than anywhere else in the house. Through to where? That's the essential question, isn't it? Through to where? Or perhaps through to when?" He consulted a pocket watch. "A word of advice. Some conversations are not meant for living ears." After researching the house's history, I discovered it was built in 1887 by a businessman interested in spiritualism, who disappeared mysteriously in 1891. Most notably, a 1953 article detailed the strange case of a university student who vanished from the boarding house, leaving all possessions behind. His journal contained entries about voices in the walls and attempts to establish contact. I planned to change rooms immediately, but overslept the next morning. Returning that evening, I found a note under my door. "They've noticed you listening. Now they're listening for you. See." The whispers began early that night, and seemed to permeate the entire room. For the first time, I could clearly distinguish words. "Can hear us now. Ready to receive." Just one step through. As I gathered essentials to leave, the air in the center of the room rippled like heat waves. The distortion expanded, forming what appeared to be an opening in reality itself. Through this impossible aperture, I glimpsed another version of my room, similarly dimensioned, but differently furnished, illuminated by sickly yellowish light. Dark figures moved within this parallel space, reaching toward the opening. I fled, and never returned, sending a friend to collect my remaining belongings during daylight. Mrs. Whitaker made no attempt to contact me about breaking my lease. Occasionally, I pass by the old Victorian. It continues operating as a boarding house, its rooms perpetually occupied, despite high turnover. Sometimes, I notice a light in room 207 and wonder about its current resident, whether they've begun to hear the whispers yet, and how long they'll resist the invitation to step through. The thing from the lake, growing up in rural Maine, meant summers spent at my grandfather's lakeside cabin, a rustic retreat nestled in pine woods, far from the nearest town. Those childhood summers formed some of my happiest memories, fishing off the wooden dock, exploring forest trails, and swimming in the pristine waters of Lake Ossipee. When my grandfather passed away, leaving me the cabin in his will, I was both touched by the gesture and thrilled to have a personal sanctuary away from my hectic life in Boston. Now 32, I had built a moderately successful career as a software developer, a profession that left me craving the simplicity and natural beauty of the lake. The first summer after inheriting the property, I took a 3-week vacation to restore the cabin, which had stood vacant since my grandfather's passing 2 years earlier. Arriving in early June, I found the structure weathered but sound, a testament to my grandfather's craftsmanship and regular maintenance. The location remained as idyllic as I remembered: 2 acres of wooded land with approximately 200 feet of private shoreline on the lake's northern edge. The first few days passed pleasantly as I cleared fallen branches, repaired minor damage to the roof, and cleaned decades of accumulated dust and cobwebs from the interior. By the end of the first week, the cabin had been restored to a comfortable state, allowing me to simply enjoy the tranquility of the setting. One evening, as sunset painted the lake in amber and crimson, I noticed something unusual while sitting on the dock. Approximately 50 yards offshore, the flat surface of the water exhibited an odd disturbance, not the ripples of a fish jumping or a bird landing, but a sustained turbulence in a roughly circular area, about 6 feet in diameter. Having spent countless hours observing this lake throughout my childhood, I couldn't recall ever seeing such a phenomenon. The disturbance continued for nearly a minute before subsiding, leaving the water mirror smooth once again as twilight deepened. Curious but not particularly concerned, I mentioned it during a phone conversation with Earl Mackenzie, a longtime resident who owned the nearest cabin about half a mile down the shoreline. "Probably just a submerged log releasing trapped gases from decomposition," Earl suggested, his Maine accent more pronounced than I remembered. "Lake bottom shifts all the time, especially after spring thaw." His explanation seemed reasonable enough, and I thought little more about it until 3 nights later, when I awoke suddenly at 2:17 a.m., according to the bedside clock. What had roused me became immediately apparent: a sound emanating from the direction of the lake, unlike anything I had ever heard before. It began as a low, resonant hum that gradually modulated into something resembling a whale's song, but distorted and somehow wrong, as if human vocal cords were attempting to replicate cetacean communications. The eerie melody rose and fell for approximately 30 seconds before fading into silence, leaving behind an almost tangible unease in the darkness of the cabin. Sleep proved elusive after that disturbance. At first light, I walked down to the shore, scanning the placid surface of the lake for any sign of the previous night's source. Nothing seemed out of place, just the familiar mist rising from the water as dawn warmed the air. That day, I drove into the nearest town to purchase groceries and additional supplies for the cabin. While at the local hardware store, I struck up a conversation with the elderly proprietor, casually inquiring about unusual wildlife in Lake Ossipee. "What sort of unusual?" he asked, his weathered face revealing nothing. I described the strange disturbance I had observed, and the unnerving sound that had woken me. "Probably just a moose swimming across," he suggested after a moment's consideration. "They can make odd noises, especially during mating season." Yet something in his deliberately casual tone suggested he might know more than he was willing to share. When pressed, he simply shrugged and remarked that old lakes keep their own secrets, before changing the subject. Returning to the cabin that afternoon, I found a handwritten note tucked under my door, unusual given the property's isolation. In neat, precise handwriting, it read "Ved new" to the lake. Don't swim after sunset. Local custom. A concerned neighbor. No signature, no explanation, just that cryptic warning. I assumed it must be from Earl, though the handwriting didn't match what I remembered from Christmas cards his family had sent over the years. That evening, I observed the lake more attentively as daylight waned. Just as the sun dipped below the tree line, the same circular disturbance appeared, this time closer to my dock, perhaps 30 yards out. The agitation of the water seemed more pronounced, creating waves that gently lapped against the wooden pilings. As twilight deepened into true darkness, I remained on the dock, a powerful flashlight in hand. The temperature dropped noticeably, and an unusual silence descended. No frogs calling, no insects buzzing, none of the typical nocturnal sounds that should have filled the woodland air. Just after 10 o'clock, the humming began again, initially so low it was more felt than heard, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the depths of the lake itself. Gradually it rose in pitch and volume, until it acquired that same unsettling, almost but not quite organic quality I had heard the previous night. I directed my flashlight toward the source, the same area of disturbed water. The powerful beam penetrated several feet below the surface, but revealed nothing beyond dark, swirling currents. As the sound reached its peak, the disturbance intensified, water churning as if boiling from below. Then something breached the surface, just for an instant. Not enough time to discern details, but sufficient to register mass and movement, unlike any fish or aquatic mammal I recognized. The flashlight caught a glimpse of something pale and elongated before it submerged again, leaving expanding ripples in its wake. The humming abruptly ceased, the disturbed water gradually calmed, and the normal sounds of the night forest hesitantly resumed. I spent hours researching local wildlife on my laptop that night, finding nothing that matched what I had glimpsed. Sleep came reluctantly, haunted by half-formed images of pale appendages rising from dark waters. The following morning, I hiked along the shoreline to Earl Mackenzie's cabin, determined to get straight answers about the lake. His property appeared well maintained, but showed no signs of recent occupation, unusual for early summer, when most cabin owners would be enjoying the seasonal weather. Returning to my cabin, I detoured through the woods to approach from the opposite direction, a path I remembered from childhood explorations. This route took me past a small clearing, where to my surprise, I discovered a makeshift shrine of sorts, smooth lake stones, arranged in a circle surrounding a wooden post carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Hanging from the post were various items, fishing lures, small bundles of dried plants, and what appeared to be animal bones threaded on twine. The shrine looked regularly maintained, rather than abandoned, with fresh pine needles scattered across the stone circle, and recently placed wildflowers at its base. Something about the arrangement spoke of ritualistic purpose, rather than random decoration. That evening, rather than watching from the dock, I positioned myself in the cabin's second-floor bedroom, which offered an elevated view of the lake through a large window. I had set up a digital camera, with a telephoto lens on a tripod, ready to document whatever appeared. The disturbance began precisely at sunset, now only 20 yards from shore, close enough to capture clearly with the camera. I recorded nearly 40 minutes of footage as the water churned with increasing violence, while daylight faded to dusk. At 9:47 p.m., the humming started loud enough to vibrate the window glass. Through the camera's viewfinder, I observed the water bulging upward, forming a dome-like protrusion approximately 8 feet in diameter. The surface tension stretched, but didn't break as something massive pushed against it from below. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, the water parted. What emerged defied immediate classification, neither fish nor cephalopod nor reptile, but somehow combining elements of all three. A pale, elongated form with multiple appendages rose vertically from the lake, extending at least 12 feet above the surface. I triggered the camera's rapid shot function, capturing a series of images as the entity rotated slowly, as if surveying the shoreline. Its upper portion appeared vaguely humanoid, a suggestion of shoulders supporting an oblong head with no discernible facial features, save for what might have been sensory organs arranged in an asymmetrical pattern. Most disturbing were the numerous tendrils that unfurled from its midsection, some thin as fingers, others thick as arms, all moving with deliberate intelligent purpose rather than random flailing. As it completed its rotation, the featureless head tilted upward, directly toward my window. Though I could discern no eyes, I felt with absolute certainty that it had detected my presence. A fundamental shift occurred in the humming tone, acquiring harmonics that resonated painfully in my skull. Without conscious decision, I found myself standing, moving toward the stairs. Some external influence was compelling me toward the lake, overwhelming rational thought with an intense, inexplicable desire to enter the water. I struggled against this foreign impulse, clutching the banister to prevent my continued descent. The mental pressure intensified, accompanied by vivid impressions, not quite images or sounds, but concepts being forcibly inserted into my consciousness. Ancient. Patient, hungry, These weren't words so much as primal sensations, communicating a presence that had existed in the lake's depths for countless centuries, periodically drawing sustenance from those drawn to its waters. With tremendous effort, I managed to pull my phone from my pocket and trigger the emergency call function. The moment the dispatcher's voice came through the speaker, the mental compulsion shattered like glass. Through the window, I glimpsed the pale form rapidly submerging, the water closing over it as the humming faded. When local police arrived 40 minutes later, they found me huddled in the kitchen, still shaking from the encounter. I showed them the photographs I had captured, but to my horror, each image showed nothing but disturbed water, no emerging entity, no pale appendages, nothing to validate what I had so clearly seen. The officers exchanged knowing glances before the senior deputy finally spoke. Lake Ossipee has certain traditions, he said carefully. Old-timers don't swim after dark, never have. They leave offerings at certain spots along the shore, just small things, tokens really. Been happening as long as anyone can remember. Offerings, I echoed, recalling the shrine I had discovered. It's just superstition, his partner interjected quickly. But folks who've been here generations tend to respect local customs, the ones who don't. He trailed off with a shrug. Have there been incidents? I pressed, missing swimmers, occasionally. Usually attributed to cramps or hypothermia. Lake gets cold in the deep parts. Strong currents too, in certain areas. The deputy's tone remained professional, but his eyes conveyed a warning. Might be best if you finished your vacation elsewhere, sir. Cabin's been empty a while. Lake might take time to adjust to new folks. I departed the following morning, leaving a hastily scrawled note for Earl should he return. Back in Boston, I researched Lake Ossepee's history, discovering scattered references to the deep dweller in century-old local newspapers, alongside reports of occasional disappearances dating back to the earliest colonial settlements. More disturbing was what I found in my grandfather's personal effects, a journal I had previously overlooked, containing detailed observations of similar disturbances dating back to the 1960s. The final entry, written 3 months before his death, described an arrangement reached and his decision to continue the tradition for the safety of all concerned. I've never returned to the cabin. Last month, I listed the property for sale, significantly below market value. It sold quickly to a young family from Connecticut,
eager for their own lakeside retreat. Sometimes I consider warning them about swimming after sunset. Most days, I convince myself the entire experience was a stress-induced hallucination. But on stormy nights when sleep proves elusive, I find myself wondering about those offerings at the shrine, who maintains them now, and what might happen should they cease. The lake has been patient for centuries. I suspect it can wait a little longer for new arrivals to learn its customs, or become part of its enduring secrets.
The caretaker. I've always been drawn to jobs that keep me isolated from people. So when I saw the posting for a winter caretaker position at Silver Pine Lodge, a remote mountain retreat closed during winter months, it seemed perfect for me. Harmon, the property manager, seemed more concerned with my tolerance for isolation than maintenance qualifications. "It's just you in the mountains for 5 months," he emphasized. "Last cell tower signal disappears about 17 miles back. We've got a satellite phone for emergencies, but it's unreliable during storms. Some folks start talking to themselves by February." I assured him solitude wouldn't be an issue. What I didn't mention was how much I was looking forward to it. The lodge was a sprawling main building with 12 guest rooms, a spacious common area with a stone fireplace, and a commercial kitchen. Several detached cabins dotted the surrounding acres. My responsibilities: maintain heating systems, clear snow, perform repairs, and conduct security checks. The first snow fell just 2 weeks after the lodge closed in mid-October. By early November, the access road became impassable, sealing me in until spring. During my third week, I noticed something odd while checking Pine Hollow, the largest detached cabin. Though I was certain I'd locked it previously, I found the door unlocked, the key still inserted. Inside, a chair was pulled away from the dining table, positioned facing the large window overlooking the frozen pond. I dismissed it as forgetfulness, though it troubled me for days. The incident prompted me to establish a more rigorous documentation system. The following week brought the first major storm, 3 days of howling winds and heavy snowfall. When the weather cleared, I resumed inspections. Upon reaching Pine Hollow, my blood ran cold. Fresh footprints in the snow led directly to the front door. Footprints that couldn't possibly be mine, as I hadn't visited since before the storm. The door was unlocked again. Inside, the chair had moved once more, now with an indentation in the cushion, as if someone had recently sat there. I conducted a thorough search, finding no footprints other than those leading to Pine Hollow. That night, I called Mr. Harmon. "Probably just an animal," he suggested. "Raccoons can be clever about getting into places." But the footprints were human, I insisted. And nothing else was disturbed, just that chair moved to face the window. After a pause, he said, "Listen, there's something I probably should have mentioned during your orientation." The connection deteriorated, his words becoming unintelligible, before the call dropped entirely. The next morning, daylight revealed what I'd missed: a set of footprints leading away from the cabin, but in a different direction than the approaching prints. These tracks headed directly toward the frozen pond, before abruptly stopping at its edge. 2 uneventful weeks passed. Then came the knocking, 3 distinct raps on my apartment door, just after midnight, during another snowfall. "Who's there?" I called, reaching for my flashlight. No response. The peephole revealed only the empty hallway. The knocking recurred for 3 consecutive nights, always at precisely 12:17 a.m., never accompanied by any visible presence. On the 4th night, something compelled me to respond differently. "You can come in," I said. The door handle turned slowly, the door swinging inward. Insufraid, the door swinging inward. No one entered, yet the door remained open, as if inviting me out. I followed a single set of footprints leading away from the lodge toward Pine Hollow. The cabin door stood open, light spilling from within, though the power remained disconnected. Inside, I glimpsed a figure seated in that chair, gazing out at the pond. I never saw its face. As I entered, the figure dissolved like mist. The chair remained positioned before the window, bearing the fresh impression of someone recently seated. On the window glass, written in condensation, asterisk, I never left. That night, I searched the lodge's office for information. In old records, I discovered a folder labeled Incident Report, Winter 1976 inches, containing a missing person report for David Mercer, winter caretaker. When spring staff arrived to reopen the lodge, they found no trace of him, except a maintenance log that ended abruptly in mid-January. His belongings remained in the caretaker's quarters, his vehicle still in the maintenance shed. Authorities concluded he had likely attempted to hike out and succumbed to hypothermia. The case was classified as an accidental death, though no remains were ever recovered. A handwritten note dated years later stated, "Recurring anomalies at Pine Hollow Cabin. Consider permanent closure of this structure, or extensive renovation to remedy." The cabin had never been closed or renovated. The knocking ceased, but each morning I would find fresh internal footprints in the dust, always originating from the middle of the room, circling once, then stopping at the window. Never entering, never leaving. I began leaving the chair positioned before the window, acknowledging the presence. In late January, during a rare break in the weather, I ventured onto the frozen pond, drawn to a specific area. I began digging, striking something solid 3 feet down. What I uncovered wasn't immediately recognizable as human, but the clothing was unmistakable. The standard issue winter uniform for lodge staff, older style and logo. That night, I returned to Pine Hollow with a small box containing personal effects recovered with the remains, a wedding ring, pocket watch and wallet, with a faded photograph. I placed these on the table beside the window-facing chair. At precisely 12:17 a.m., the temperature in the cabin plummeted. Frost formed on the windows within seconds. The items began to vibrate, then scattered as if swept by an invisible hand. A message appeared in the frost. Asterisk, not mine. Find me. Asterisk, I spent the remainder of winter in strange coexistence with the presence. Sometimes I'd arrive to find maintenance tasks mysteriously completed. Other times, I'd discover indications of displeasure, items rearranged, doors left ajar. Communications evolved from frost writings to more elaborate methods. Books would appear, open to specific passages with words underlined. The radio would activate, catching fragments that seemed to form responses to my questions. Through these disjointed communications, a narrative emerged. David Mercer had not attempted to hike out. Something at the lodge had driven him to flee during a blizzard. The remains I discovered were not his, but those of a previous caretaker, whose disappearance had never been documented. When spring arrived and the access road cleared, Mr. Harmon appeared genuinely surprised to find me, not only alive but in good spirits. When I attempted to discuss my experiences, he interrupted dismissively. "Every caretaker reports something," he said. "It's the isolation playing tricks on your mind." "But the footprints," I began. "Your own tracks, forgotten during the monotony of daily rounds," he countered. "Or wildlife. And the writing in the frost, the items moving by themselves." He sighed. "Listen, if you're interested in returning next season, I'd suggest being more circumspect about these experiences in your final report." That evening, I made a final visit to Pine Hollow. On the table, I found what appeared to be a page torn from the lodge's original blueprints, yellowed with age. It showed a section of foundation beneath the main building that didn't appear in current plans. Circled in what looked like dried blood was a small room, annotated in faded handwriting. The
for storage of unstable elements. Not because I need the isolation, but because something unfinished remains at Silver Pine Lodge, something that only occurs during the deepest days of winter, when escape is impossible. Sometimes I wonder if I'm returning to help free whatever remains of David Mercer, or if I'm simply following his footsteps toward whatever fate befell him in that unmarked room beneath the foundation. Either way, I've come to understand that being a caretaker at Silver Pine involves maintaining more than just the physical property. Some things require a different kind of care, the kind that can only be provided by someone willing to acknowledge their existence.
We hatched the night shift. The Sunrise Valley Care Center looks nothing like typical nursing homes. No institutional corridors or antiseptic smell. Instead, bright spaces, garden views, and excellent staffing, at least according to the brochure. What the marketing materials don't mention is the night shift, those hours between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., when the building transforms into something else entirely. I started at Sunrise Valley 6 months ago as a certified nursing assistant. Day shifts matched the advertising, challenging but rewarding. Then Marjorie, the scheduling coordinator, approached me about night shifts. They were short-staffed and the differential pay was substantial. Trying to save for nursing school, I couldn't refuse. Night shift is different, Lisa, a veteran CNA, warned during orientation. The residents change after dark, and I don't just mean sundowning. What do you mean? I asked. She hesitated. You'll see. Just remember, don't enter room 237 alone, no matter what you hear. Always bring someone with you. I laughed, assuming she was hazing me. She didn't join my laughter. The East Wing housed 32 residents, with varying cognitive impairments. My responsibilities included hourly rounds, toileting assistance, position changes, and responding to call lights, standard duties performed in sleep-dimmed hallways. My first night passed uneventfully. By 2 a.m., most residents were asleep, with occasional calls for assistance. The building settled into that distinctive quiet of large structures at night, subtle creaks and sighs punctuated by soft hums of medical equipment. On my third night, I noticed room 237, not because the door was remarkable, but because of how staff behaved around it. During rounds, my partner Marcus would slow his pace as we approached, eyes fixed on the closed door until we passed. When a call light illuminated from that room around 3 a.m., he insisted on accompanying me, despite being mid-task. The resident, Mrs. Eleanor Beaumont, was a frail woman in her 90s, with advanced dementia. She had accidentally triggered the call button while reaching for water. As we adjusted her blankets, I observed nothing unusual about her or the room. Why the special protocol for this room? I asked Marcus afterward. Mrs. Beaumont has episodes, he replied vaguely. Sometimes she gets confused about who's in the room with her. Don't they all? I countered. Mistaking caregivers for family members was common among dementia patients. Not like this, Marcus said, unusually serious. Just trust me. Over the following weeks, I settled into night shift rhythm. The quiet allowed me to connect with alert residents and insomniacs, sundowning patients who calmed around 2 a.m., and those requiring frequent monitoring. Mrs. Beaumont became a favorite. During lucid periods, usually between 3 and 5 a.m., she shared fascinating stories about her life as a cultural anthropologist in the 1950s. She had studied death rituals across cultures, particularly those involving communication with the deceased. Every civilization has recognized that the boundary between life and death is more permeable than we admit, she told me during one early morning conversation, especially in those liminal hours when most people are asleep. The veil thins considerably between 3 and 4 a.m. I attributed these discussions to her academic background, combined with dementia-related confabulation. though there was remarkable clarity in these conversations compared to her daytime confusion. 2 months into my employment, I was performing rounds alone because my partner had called in sick. The night supervisor instructed me to call for assistance from the West Wing if any room 237 issues arose. Around 3:17 a.m., Mrs. Beaumont's call light illuminated. The West Wing was handling an emergency, so the supervisor instructed me to visually check on Mrs. Beaumont, but wait for assistance if she needed physical care. As I approached room 237, unusual coldness permeated the hallway. I knocked softly before entering. "Mrs. Beaumont, did you need something?" The room was darker than usual. The night light apparently burned out. I could just make out Mrs. Beaumont's small form, her white hair catching what little light filtered through the blinds. "They're coming through tonight," she whispered urgently. I tried to stop them, but I'm not strong enough anymore. I reached for the bedside lamp. "Let me get some light in here." "No," she hissed, grasping my wrist with surprising strength. "Light drives them back temporarily, but it makes them angry. They'll only return with greater numbers." Her fingers felt impossibly cold. I gently disengaged and reached for the call button, concerned about her agitation. "Who are you talking about?" I asked, trying to maintain professionalism despite my growing unease. "You've seen them, haven't you? In the corners of your vision during rounds, standing beside beds of those close to passing. They're drawn to transitional states, the space between consciousness and unconsciousness, between life and death." The room's temperature plummeted further. My breath became visible. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, to move, in ways that defied the nature of darkness. "They're here," Mrs. Beaumont whispered, pulling her blankets tighter. "They've been waiting for me. I've kept them at bay for 70 years, but my training wasn't meant to last this long. The barriers are breaking down." The call button felt slick beneath my fingers, though it appeared normal. A soft rhythmic tapping began, not mechanical but deliberate, like fingernails against a hard surface. "Don't look directly at them," Mrs. Beaumont advised, her academic tone returning. "Peripheral vision is best for perceiving entities that exist adjacent to our reality. Direct observation causes them to shift against better judgment." I followed her suggestion, allowing my gaze to rest on the wall while attending to movement in my peripheral vision. What I perceived defied description, not quite a shape or presence, but an absence that moved with purpose, a void folding through space in ways that contradicted natural law. The tapping intensified from multiple points: window, bathroom door, ceiling. Each sound corresponded to one of the moving voids I could almost but not quite perceive. "What are they?" I managed to ask. "Opportunists," she replied. "They exist in the spaces between worlds, between states of being. They seek transitional moments to cross over. Hospitals and care facilities are particularly attractive because of the constant transitions occurring here: sleep to wakefulness, life to death." The door swung shut with a decisive click. The call button went dead. "Most are merely curious," she continued in a lecture cadence, "but some have developed a taste for the energy released during transitions, particularly the final transition. Different cultures called them by different names, but the descriptions remained remarkably consistent across geographical and historical boundaries." The voids converged toward the bed. As temperature dropped further, ice crystals formed on the water glass. "Mrs. Beaumont, we need to leave," I said, attempting to help her up despite protocols. "It's too late," she replied calmly. "But they're not here for you. Not tonight." She reached beneath her pillow and withdrew a small leather pouch covered with anthropological symbols. "I've carried this since 1952, she explained, loosening the drawstring. "Prepared it during field research in Louisiana. It was intended as a research tool, a means of communication."
A bitter smile crossed her face. It worked too well. The voids had surrounded the bed, manifesting as visual distortions rather than observable entities. The tapping ceased, replaced by sounds like rushing water or distant whispers, thousands of voices speaking simultaneously just below comprehension. Mrs. Beaumont withdrew gray powder from the pouch. "This will buy us time," she said, blowing it in a circular pattern around us. Where particles settled, they briefly illuminated outlines of what surrounded us, forms resembling elongated human figures, with too many appendages arranged impossibly. The whispers receded momentarily. "Listen carefully," Mrs. Beaumont commanded. "I've been holding them at bay since accidentally opening a doorway during my research. As long as I remained alive and aware, my knowledge kept them contained. But I'm dying, not tonight, but soon, and when I go, the doorway will stand unguarded." She pressed the pouch into my hand. "The contents must be replenished new moon by new moon. The recipe is sewn into the lining. Find someone to continue after you, someone who can perceive the spaces between as you can." "I don't understand," I protested, though the pouch felt unnaturally significant in my hand. "You will," she assured me. "You were drawn to night shift for a reason. Those who naturally attune to liminal spaces often find themselves working when others sleep." The powder's effect was diminishing. Whispers returning intensified. One void figure lunged toward us, stopped at the fading powder perimeter, then began testing for weaknesses. "When I die," she continued urgently, "come to this room immediately. Scatter the remaining contents from each corner to the center, then recite the words stitched into the bottom seam. It will reset the binding temporarily, until you prepare a new mixture." The door burst open as Marcus and a West Wing nurse entered, flooding the room with light. The temperature normalized instantly, and the void figures retreated to the corners, still perceivable peripherally, but no longer advancing. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, eyeing the pouch in my hand. "Just fine," I responded automatically, pocketing it. Mrs. Beaumont was having trouble sleeping. We were just talking. Later Marcus confronted me in the medication room. "You went into 237 alone," he stated accusingly. "The West Wing was handling an emergency," I defended. "I was instructed to check visually." "Did you see anything unusual?" he pressed. I hesitated, uncertain how much institutional knowledge existed about Mrs. Beaumont's situation. "Nothing specific," I hedged, "but the room was unusually cold."